just to give you a sense of proportion, the likely temperature rise that we will see by the end of the century is on the order of 2.6 degrees centigrade. Somewhere between 1.6 and 3.8 is the standard estimates from the UN Climate Panel. That doesn't sound like very much, and of course it's important to recognize that certainly does not mean it's the end of the world, but because it's an average of the planet, it is a significant problem. But we should also ask ourselves, how much of a problem is it? Well, the economic models tell us, well, I can't seem to do that. The economic models tell us it's about $15 trillion. That's a significant cost. But let's also remember, it's by no means the end of the world. It's estimated it's about 0.5 percentage point of the GDP of the 21st century. So there's a significant cost. Global warming cost is not zero, but it's not 100% either. And we often get the sense that this is the end of the world. It's not. It's 0.5 percentage point, which of course means it's a significant problem. It's something we need to tackle, but it's not the end of the world. And I think that's why we need to have the courage to say, well, so what is the right strategy? That's what I'll get to before, but first I think we need to tackle the idea that very often scares people witless on global warming. So yes, global warming is real, it's man-made, it is an important problem, but likewise, we often get scared witless by vastly exaggerated and one-sided propositions that actually lead to bad judgments. So let's try and take a look at this. And again, I'll pick out on Al Gore, not because Al Gore is the only one to pick, but he's just the most prominent in many ways. Al Gore obviously says global warming is a planetary emergency. And I think you'll recognize this sort of argument that we hear from many, many different areas. He says, we have just 10 years to avert a major catastrophe that could send our entire planet into a tailspin of epic destruction involving extreme weather, floods, droughts, epidemics, and killer heat waves beyond anything we've ever experienced. I mean, certainly this is something we want to avoid. But the real question here is this true? Is this the kind of truth that we are looking for in extending our vision of global warming to the end of the century? Well, let me just take, again, a very short, brief look at two of his claims. He says we're going to see more killer heat waves. Well, let's take a look at that. He also says we're going to see more epidemics. Let's take a look at malaria, just to give you a sense of the proportion of some of those claims that we hear. And it gives you suddenly a realization that while there are some truths to the problems that are being mentioned, a lot of this is also exaggerated and one-sided and leads to bad judgment. Take a look at heat deaths. Are we going to see more heat deaths because of global warming by the mid-century, for instance? Yes, we are. As temperatures rise, we're going to see more heat waves, and hence we're going to see more people dying from heat. It's really not very complicated. We have some of the best studies for Europe in a transnational study by about 50 academics across all of Europe, studying both the impacts of heat deaths and cold deaths, and extending it into the future. We also have similar studies, by the way, for Sao Paulo, but we don't have it for many other tropical cities, but it actually shows the same thing as what I'm going to be presenting here. Definitely, because of global warming, we're estimating, for instance, in the UK, that we're going to see about 2,000 more people die from heat every year because of global warming by mid-century. We should definitely say that. We should definitely be honest about that. That is a problem. The problem I have with this argument, though, is if you only make that point, you're not telling the whole truth. Because as temperatures rise, we're going to see more heat waves and hence more people dying from heat. But as temperatures rise, we're also going to see fewer cold waves and hence fewer people dying from cold. Surely you should also mention that. Now, obviously, if this is a small problem, maybe it wouldn't matter, but it's not. It turns out that for these exact studies that are the best studies and the ones that everybody references, it turns out that for the UK, by mid-century, because of cold, we're estimating that about 20,000 fewer people are going to die from cold in Britain. Surely, we're not well informed if we only hear 2,000 more people are going to die, but we're not being told that 20,000 fewer are going to die as well. And actually, we're estimating now, of course, you'd excuse me for saying this might not be so surprising for the UK. You know, I'm from Denmark. Maybe we'd also like it to be a little warmer. But it actually turns out to be true for virtually all regions, including South America. except there's only one region where it's not true, sub-Saharan Africa, where there's going to be slightly more heat deaths than avoided cold deaths. Actually, we are estimating that by the end of the century, by mid-century, we will see about 400,000 more heat deaths, but about 1.8 million fewer cold deaths. So all in all, a net benefit of 1.4 million avoided deaths. Again, we need to hear that. Notice, this does not mean I'm saying, hey, maybe we should have more global warming. That's not the point. Because overall, we know from the economic models that there are more disbenefits than benefits from global warming. My point is simply to say, only focusing on the disbenefits and exaggerating those and forgetting to tell the benefits of global warming and weighing those up, we're unlikely to have a good sense of what's the problem of global warming. So this is an unlikely way to give us good information about how to tackle, for instance, heat deaths. We also see that, because what's the solution then to heat deaths? People point out the big European heat wave in August 2003. If you remember, about 35,000 people died across 2 weeks in Europe and in August. 7,500, mostly old women, died in Paris, France alone. And people say, we need to look at this problem and make sure we deal with that for the future. And we should deal with that in just one way, namely cut carbon emissions. Now, the question is that a good way to help future generations of old women dying in Paris, France from heat waves? And the argument obviously is no. If we are even if we buy into this whole argument, if we cut carbon emissions, it means temperature will still rise, but it'll rise slightly less. So what we're essentially saying is, yeah, more and more old women are going to die in Paris, France, but slightly fewer more women are going to die because of what we've done with cutting carbon emissions towards the end of the century. That's surely not a very smart way to deal with this. And so again, we need to have the courage of asking, if we actually care about heat wave deaths, why is it we're not talking about how we could do that in the best possible way? Well, we know part of it is, there's virtually no heat deaths in the US. Why? Air conditioning. Listen, if we worry about old women in Paris, France dying from heat waves, we shouldn't cut carbon emissions and make sure that even more of them are going to die, but slightly fewer more by the end of the century. We should give them air conditioning. It's really not very complicated, right? Of course, a lot of people will then feel uncomfortable, and that's a reasonable argument that this is going to lead to more carbon emissions. True. But another point, of course, is to realize that most cities where most people are going to be living, 70 to 80 or maybe even 90% by the end of the century, are much hotter than their surrounding countrysides, basically because there's lots of black surfaces and very little water. Actually, Tokyo holds the world record. Tokyo is about 12.5 degrees warmer than its surrounding countrysides in August, basically because there's lots of black surfaces and very little water. But if that's the case, why don't we do something about that? We could help somewhere between 70 and 90% of humanity much cheaper, much faster, if we focused on making sure that there was less black surfaces and more water. It's really very, very simple. We've done these calculations for New York, for Los Angeles. Here I'll present them for London. If we added more water and greenery to London, we could reduce daytime heat wave temperatures by about 8 degrees centigrade. We could do more than twice as much good as what we could ever hope to do with cutting carbon emissions. And much quicker, much cheaper, and oh, by the way, London would be much more beautiful. If we actually care about making sure we help people who are going to die from heat waves, why on earth is it we're only talking about one solution, namely cut carbon emissions, instead of solving the problem that would actually help these people, namely making greener, more watery cities that would be cooler? Or, to put it very, very bluntly, if the main problem is that there's so many black surfaces, why don't we do something about that?